Rain slapped the broken pavement like it was angry at the world. 5 men in dark suits stood under a flickering streetlight behind a closed nightclub in Itiwan, their voices low, their posture relaxed in the way only dangerous men ever look relaxed. Business was being discussed. Quiet business. The kind that never reached daylight. That was when a small voice cut through the rain. Please, please help me. They're beating my mama. Chairman Kang Dae-hoon turned slowly. The girl stood at the mouth of the alley, barefoot, soaked to the bone. A little black girl, no more than 5. Her knees were scraped, her pink jacket was torn, and she clutched a stuffed doll with one missing eye like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her chest heaved as she tried to breathe. For half a second, no one moved. The men behind Kong froze. Not because they were afraid of the girl, but because they knew their boss. And they knew that tone. That moment when something quiet inside him shifted. Kang stepped forward, rain sliding down the sharp lines of his face. The neon sign above flickered, lighting the dragon tattoo climbing his neck. "Who is beating your mama?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The girl swallowed hard. "Diego," she said, struggling with the name. "Him and his friends. They won't stop. She's bleeding. There's blood everywhere." One of Kang's men reached instinctively for the gun under his jacket. Kong lifted one finger. "Wait." He crouched down until he was eye level with her. The rain soaked into his tailored coat. He didn't care. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zuri," she whispered. "I'm 5. Almost 6. Her hands shook so badly the doll nearly slipped. Kong took it gently and placed it back in her arms. His hand rested on her small shoulder, steadying her. "Where's your mama, Zuri?" She pointed down the alley, past a row of decaying apartments. "3rd floor. Door broken. They're yelling. She keeps crying." As if summoned by her words, a scream drifted through the night. A woman's scream. Weak. Desperate. Kong stood. He shrugged off his coat and draped it around Zuri's shoulders, the fabric swallowing her small frame. "Stay here," he said calmly. "You're safe now." Safe. It was a word he didn't use often. He turned and spoke 2 words in Korean. The men moved instantly. They didn't run. They flowed. Phones came out. Weapons were checked. Someone faded into the shadows to secure the perimeter. Zuri watched them disappear into the rain, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She didn't know who Kang Dae-hoon was. She only knew he didn't look at her the way other men did. The apartment buildings smelled like rot and fear. The stairwell light flickered as boots moved upward, fast and quiet. By the time they reached the 3rd floor, the screaming was clearer now. A crash. A man laughing. Kong didn't knock. The door flew open with one kick. Chaos filled the room. Furniture overturned. White powder scattered across a cracked table. 3 men stood over a woman curled on the floor, her arms raised weakly over her head. Amara Okafor didn't look human anymore. Her face was swollen. Blood streaked the tiles. One eye was already closing shut. Diego turned first, eyes wide, pupils blown. "What the?" He didn't finish. King's fist met his jaw with a sound that shut the room up all at once. Diego crashed into the wall, stunned. The others rushed forward. It ended quickly. A knee to the stomach. A gun, but to the head. A knife knocked away before it could be used. Trained hands. No wasted motion. But Diego scrambled. Desperation gives people speed. He grabbed a bottle, threw it wildly, and dove through the back window in a spray of glass. "Go," Kong ordered. 2 men chased, but the fire escape groaned and went silent. "Gone." Kong turned back to Amara. She was barely breathing. He knelt beside her, his voice low. "Your daughter is safe." Her swollen lips trembled. "Zuri?" "Yes." That was enough. "Car," Kong said. "Now." "No police." The men moved fast, wiping surfaces, restraining the groaning bodies on the floor. Shell casings disappeared. Doors were closed. Kong lifted Amara himself, careful, as if she might shatter. Outside, the rain had softened. Zuri sat on the curb, wrapped in Kang's coat, knees tucked to her chest. When she saw her mother, She jumped up, crying. "Mama!" Amara's eyes fluttered open at the sound. "I'm here," Kong told the child. "She's coming with us." Zuri nodded. She didn't ask questions. The black sedan slid into traffic without lights or sirens. Inside, Zuri pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the city blur by. Her mother lay across the seat, breathing shallowly. Kong held pressure on Amara's ribs with one hand, his eyes never leaving her face. He'd faced cartels, politicians, men who killed without blinking. But the sound of a child whispering, "Please don't die," did something else entirely. They didn't go to a public hospital. They went somewhere quiet, somewhere owned. Doctors didn't ask questions. Nurses didn't look twice. As Amara was rushed through white doors, King stood still for a moment, rainwater and blood drying on his shirt. A phone buzzed. One of his men held it out. "Boss, the girl is asking for her mother." King exhaled slowly. "Bring her here," he said. "And make sure no one official sees her." There are moments that change a man's life. Not with noise, not with glory, but with a small voice in the rain, asking for help when no one else would listen. Zuri Okafor had just walked into the world of Kong Dae-hoon. And somewhere in the city, a man named Diego was still breathing. If this story has already tightened something in your chest, stay with it. These kinds of stories survive because people choose to hear them. And as Zuri sat in a quiet room, waiting for a mother who might not wake up, a hunted man was already planning his return. Not to run, but to take something back. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete and old trash. Kong Dae-hoon moved first, his steps steady, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. His men followed behind him in silence, boots barely making a sound on the cracked steps. The building was tired. Paint peeled from the walls. The lights flickered like they were deciding whether to stay alive or give up. From the third floor, a scream tore through the air. Not loud, not sharp, worn. The kind of sound that came from someone who had already begged too many times. Kong stopped. Every man behind him felt it. That shift. The invisible line crossing. The door at the end of the hallway hung crooked on its hinges. The lock was smashed clean through. Light spilled out in uneven flashes, shadows moving inside. A man laughed. Kong didn't knock. He kicked. The door burst inward, slamming against the wall so hard the frame cracked. The room exploded into noise. Shouts, chairs scraping, glass breaking. Inside was chaos. A small apartment turned into a wreck. Furniture overturned. Bottles on the floor. White powder scattered across a table like spilled flour. The air was thick with sweat, alcohol, and fear. On the floor, near the couch, lay Amara Okafor. Or what was left of her strength. Her arms were curled around her head, trying to protect herself. Blood smeared the tiles. One side of her face was swollen beyond shape. Her breathing came in shallow, broken pulls, like her body was fighting to stay. Kang saw her before he saw anyone else. Then Diego Cruz spun around. What the hell? He didn't finish the sentence. Kong crossed the room in 2 steps. His fist connected with Diego's jaw. Not wild. Not angry. Clean. Heavy. Diego flew backward and slammed into the wall, sliding down with a grunt, eyes blinking in shock. The others reacted too late. One rushed forward, swinging blindly. Kang's man met him halfway, driving a knee into his stomach so hard the air left his body in a dry gasp. Another reached for his waistband. Bad move. A gun, but came down across his skull. He crumpled instantly, blood pooling under his head. The third froze. Hands up. Fear finally catching up. Please. Zip ties snapped tight around his wrists. The entire thing took less than 10 seconds. Fast. Controlled. Finished. But Diego wasn't finished. He staggered to his feet, coughing, panic burning through the drugs in his system. His eyes darted around the room, searching for escape. He grabbed a bottle from the table and threw it, wild and desperate. Glass shattered against the wall. Then he ran. He dove through the back window in a spray of broken glass, slicing his arm open as he went. His body disappeared into the darkness outside. One of Kang's men moved to chase. "Let him go," Kang said. His voice was calm, but his eyes followed the broken window. Diego Cruz was alive. That mattered. Kang turned back to Amara. She hadn't moved. He knelt beside her, ignoring the blood soaking into his pants. His hand hovered, unsure where to touch without hurting her more. "Amara," he said quietly. Her eyelids fluttered. She tried to speak. Nothing came out but a broken sound. "She's safe," Kang said. "Your daughter is safe." Her lips trembled. "Zuri," she whispered. "Yes." That single word seemed to give her permission to let go. Her body sagged. Kang caught her before her head hit the floor. "Car," he ordered. "Now." "Private clinic." "No police." One of his men hesitated. "Boss, this is messy." "Neighbors." "No police," Kang repeated. That was the end of the conversation. The men moved fast. The restrained man was dragged to his feet, gagged, hauled toward the door. Blood was wiped. Surfaces cleaned. Shell casings collected. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. This was what they did. Kang lifted Amara carefully, cradling her like she weighed nothing. Her blood soaked into his shirt, warm and sticky. He didn't react. Outside, rain fell softer now, like the sky had tired itself out. Zuri sat on the steps, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in Kang's coat. Her small hands gripped the fabric tight, like it might disappear if she let go. When she saw her mother, she jumped up so fast she almost fell. "Mama!" Her voice cracked the night open. Amara's eyes fluttered again at the sound. "I'm here," Kang told the child, adjusting his grip. "She's coming with us." Zuri nodded hard, tears running down her face. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask how. She trusted. The black sedan rolled up to the curb without headlights. The door opened. Kang slid Amara inside, settling her across the seat. Zuri climbed in beside her, small fingers finding her mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm here," she whispered again and again. Kang sat opposite them, one hand pressed gently against Amara's ribs, counting her breaths without looking at a clock. The car pulled away. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just rain on glass and the quiet hum of the engine. Zuri watched the city blur past, her face pressed to the window. Her body shook now, the fear finally catching up. She didn't cry loud. She cried silent tears, wiping them with her sleeve like she didn't want to bother anyone. Kang noticed. He looked away. This was supposed to be another night. Another problem handled. Another mess erased. Instead, there was a 5-year-old girl in his coat, whispering prayers she barely understood, and a woman bleeding in his hands because she loved the wrong man. The clinic doors opened without questions. Doctors moved fast. White lights swallowed Amara whole. Zuri stood frozen in the hallway, clutching her doll, watching her mother disappear behind swinging doors. "Will she die?" she asked. Kang looked down at her. "No," he said. He didn't promise often. Zuri nodded, trusting him completely. Somewhere in the city, Diego Cruz was running through the night, blood dripping from his arm, anger burning hotter than pain. And Kang Dae-hoon didn't yet know that letting him escape would cost more than anyone in that hallway could imagine. If this story made your chest feel heavy, it's because stories like this are real for too many people. Staying with it matters. Hit the subscribe button, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. And as Zuri sat under hospital lights waiting for a mother who might not wake up, the man who hurt her was already planning how to strike back. That moment, right there, is where everything changes. The doors to the private clinic closed with a soft hiss. White walls. Low voices. Fast footsteps. Amara Okafor was rushed down a quiet hallway on a narrow bed, doctors moving around her with practiced speed. No shouting. No questions shouted across the room. Everyone here knew who Kang Dae-hoon was, and more importantly, they knew what not to ask. Zuri stood frozen near the wall, clutching her doll so tightly her fingers hurt. Her eyes followed her mother until the bed disappeared behind double doors. "Mama," she whispered. No one answered her. Kang stood a few steps away, watching the doors like he could force them to open just by looking. Blood had dried on his shirt, dark and stiff. He hadn't noticed. One of his men approached quietly. "Boss, security is clean. No cameras from the street. No hospital record under her real name." Kong nodded once. "And the girl?" the man asked, lowering his voice. Kong looked down at Zuri. She was small. Too small for all this. Her jacket hung loose on her shoulders. Her shoes were soaked through. Fear sat on her face like it had found a permanent home. "No police," Kong said. "No social services." The man hesitated. That could cause problems. Kong turned his head slowly. "Handle it." That was all. Zuri shifted her weight, her doll slipping from her arm and hitting the floor. She stared at it for a second like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to pick it up. Kong bent down and handed it back to her. "She's with the doctors now," he said. "They're helping her." Zuri nodded, biting her lip. "Can I see her?" "Not yet." She accepted that answer without arguing, which made something tighten in Kang's chest. Children her age usually cried. Asked again. Threw tantrums. Zuri just waited. Minutes passed. Then more. A nurse came out and spoke quietly to Kong. Words like broken ribs and internal bleeding floated through the air. Kang listened without reacting, his jaw tight. "She's alive," the nurse said carefully. "But it's serious." Zuri looked up at him. "Is Mama sleeping?" "Yes," Kong said. "She needs rest." That wasn't a lie. Not fully. A car was brought around to the back entrance. Zuri climbed in silently, her legs dangling from the seat. She watched the clinic disappear behind them as the car pulled away, her reflection faint in the tinted glass. She didn't ask where they were going. The penthouse sat high above the city, wrapped in glass and steel. The elevator rose without sound, numbers climbing faster than Zuri could count. When the doors opened, cold air greeted them. The space was huge. Too huge. Marble floors reflected the ceiling lights. Tall windows showed the city stretched out below, glowing and distant. Everything was clean, sharp, perfect, and empty. Zuri stepped inside slowly, her small footsteps echoing. She turned in a slow circle, eyes wide. This place didn't feel like a home. It felt like somewhere people weren't meant to touch anything. Kong watched her from near the door. He had ordered his men to buy children's clothes, toys, books, things he didn't understand. Shopping bags sat near the couch, untouched. Zuri noticed them and walked over. She peeked inside one bag, then another. New shoes, pajamas, a coloring book. She touched the pages carefully, like they might disappear. "These are for you," Kong said. "Why?" she asked. "Because you ran into the rain. Because you were brave. Because I didn't stop this soon enough. Because you'll stay here for a little while," he said instead. Zuri nodded. She sat on the floor and opened the coloring book. She didn't color. She just stared at the pictures. The silence stretched. Kang had faced rooms full of armed men without blinking. Negotiated deals worth millions. Ended lives with a phone call. But standing there, watching a child sit on his expensive floor waiting for news that might break her, he felt useless. "When can I see Mama?" Zuri asked suddenly. The question landed hard. Kong didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the city he controlled so easily. The streets. The power. The reach. None of it mattered in that moment. "Soon," he said finally. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a lie. It was the safest word he had. Zuri accepted it again. Later that night, lawyers moved quietly. Phone calls were made. Favors were reminded. Pressure was applied in places that bent easily. Emergency custody papers appeared by morning. Temporary. Quiet. Clean. Zuri Okafor did not enter any system. She slept on the couch that night, curled around her doll, shoes still on. Kong stood nearby for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. She looked smaller asleep. Less afraid. But fear doesn't leave that fast. In another part of the city, under buzzing streetlights, Diego Cruz pressed a cloth against his bleeding arm. His jaw throbbed. His pride burned worse. He remembered the man's eyes. Calm. certain. And he hated him for it. Back in the penthouse, Kong turned away from the sleeping child and walked into his office. Reports waited for him. Names. Locations. Diego Cruz had vanished. No sightings. No calls. No noise. That bothered Kong. Because men like Diego didn't disappear to change. They disappeared to plan. Zuri stirred on the couch, mumbling her mother's name in her sleep. Kang stopped in the doorway. For the first time in years, something like guilt settled heavy in his chest. He had stepped into her life for one night, and now he was the only thing standing between her and the man who broke her world. If this chapter pulled at something inside you, it's because children like Zuri exist everywhere, waiting for someone to care. Staying with this story keeps their voices alive. And as Zuri slept in a place that didn't feel like home, the man who hurt her mother was learning how dangerous it was to leave a loose end breathing. Night settled over the city like a heavy blanket. Inside the penthouse, everything was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Zuri lay curled on the wide leather couch, her small body swallowed by pillows that smelled like money and cold air. Kang's coat was still draped over her, one sleeve hanging down to the floor. Her doll rested against her chest, its single eye staring at the ceiling. She slept lightly. Every small sound made her shift. From the doorway, Kong watched. He didn't sit close. He didn't speak. He stood back, hands in his pockets, like a guest in his own home. This place had always been silent by choice. No laughter. No children. No reminders of things he didn't have. Now there was a 5-year-old breathing softly in the dark. He turned away. In his office, lights glowed over papers spread across the desk. Phones buzzed low, one after another. His men moved quietly through the rooms, speaking in short sentences, careful not to wake the child. Nothing yet, one of them said. Diego's phone is off. His usual places are empty. Kong nodded, eyes still on the city through the glass. Keep looking, he said. He doesn't disappear. He hides. The man hesitated. Boss, you want this quiet? No, Kong replied. I want it everywhere. The order spread fast. Across the city, doors opened. Favors were called in. Eyes started watching places they hadn't watched in a long time. Diego Cruz's name moved through the streets like a warning. Back in the living room, Zuri stirred. She sat up slowly, blinking, confused by where she was. The room was too big, too bright, too empty. She slid off the couch and padded across the marble floor, her feet making soft sounds. She found the shopping bags again and pulled out the coloring book and crayons. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, and opened to a blank page. For a long moment, she didn't draw. Then she picked up a yellow crayon. She drew a circle at the top of the page. A sun. Big. Smiling. Below it, 2 stick figures. One small. One tall. She gave the tall one dark hair. Broad shoulders. She gave the small one braids. She colored their hands touching. She didn't know why she drew it. She just did. When she was done, she stared at it for a while, then wrote the only words she knew how to spell clearly. Thank you. Her letters were crooked. The crayon pressed too hard in places. She yawned, closed the book, and lay back down on the couch, falling asleep with the page still open beside her. Kong didn't see the drawing right away. He stayed in his office until near dawn, speaking quietly into phones, listening to reports that led nowhere. Diego was gone. No sightings. No calls. No noise. That worried him more than panic would have. Just before sunrise, Kang stepped back into the living room. Zuri was asleep again, her mouth slightly open, her doll tucked under her arm. The city lights had dimmed, replaced by the soft blue of early morning. As he turned to leave, his foot brushed the coloring book. He stopped. He bent down and picked it up. The drawing stared back at him. Simple lines. Bright colors. A sun too big for the page. 2 people holding hands. Kang's fingers tightened around the paper. He had seen contracts worth millions. Photos meant to destroy men. Documents that shifted power. This was different. There was no fear in the picture. No blood. No shouting. Just safety. And somehow, she had drawn him into it. He didn't know how long he stood there. When one of his men cleared his throat softly behind him, Kong didn't turn. "Boss," the man said. Still nothing. "Diego hasn't shown his face anywhere." Kong folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Expand the search," he said. "Every block. Every place he's ever touched." "Yes, boss." The man hesitated. "What about the girl?" Kong glanced at Zuri. "She stays," he said, "until her mother wakes up." "And if Diego comes back?" King's jaw tightened. "Then he's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." Morning came slowly. Zuri woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it rushed back. The rain. The screams. Her mother. She sat up fast. "Mama," she called. Kong was already there. "She's still resting," he said. "The doctors are helping her." Zuri nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. "No." "Then why am I here?" Kong didn't answer right away. "Because you needed somewhere safe," he said finally. She thought about that. "Is Mama safe?" Kong held her gaze. "Yes," he said. This time, it was a promise. Outside the penthouse, the city moved on like nothing had happened. People went to work. Cars filled the roads. Music played in shops. But under that normal life, something darker was shifting. Diego Cruz was watching. From somewhere low and hidden, he listened to the city talk his name. He saw his places go quiet, felt the walls closing in. And he smiled. Because men like him didn't run forever. They waited. Back in the penthouse, Kang stood alone later that night, the drawing laid flat on his desk. He stared at it longer than he should have. This child had stepped into his world by accident. And now, whether he liked it or not, his world had reached back. If this chapter made your heart feel heavy, it's because guilt has a way of showing up when innocence does. Stories like this matter because silence is what hurts people the most. And as Kong Dae-hoon stared at a child's drawing under city lights, the man who caused all of this was preparing to make sure the past didn't stay buried. The call came just before dawn. Kong Dae-hoon was standing in his office, city lights fading as the sky turned gray, when his phone vibrated once on the desk. He didn't need to look at the screen to know something was wrong. Phones never rang at that hour unless the night had gone bad. He answered without a word. "Boss," the voice on the other end said, tight and uneven. "There's been an incident." Kang's hand stilled on the glass window. "What kind of incident?" he asked. A pause. "Too long." "The woman," the voice said. "Amara Okafor. She's gone." For a moment, the world didn't move. Kong turned slowly. "Explain." "She was taken from the private wing. 20 minutes ago. We found Jaemin in the stairwell. He's alive. Gunshot to the shoulder. Head injury. He's not making sense yet." Kang's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "How many?" he asked. "At least 3. Masks. They knew the layout. They avoided cameras we didn't even know were blind. Professional." Kong was already moving, pulling on his jacket. "I'm on my way," he said. The drive to the clinic felt longer than it ever had. Traffic lights blurred past. The city woke up around him, unaware that something had just cracked open beneath its feet. When he arrived, the private wing was chaos wrapped in quiet voices. Nurses stood in clusters, shaken. Security guards paced, hands trembling on radios. Police officers lingered at the edges, already being fed soft lies. Kong walked through them like smoke. Straight to Amara's room. The bed was empty. Sheets twisted and torn, dark stains smeared across white fabric where 4 lines had been ripped out. One monitor lay shattered on the floor. On the wall above the headboard, something had been written. Not with ink. With blood. "You took mine. I took yours." The letters were uneven, angry, smeared by a shaking hand. Below the words, taped crookedly to the wall, was a photograph. Kong stared at it. Amara sat bound to a chair in what looked like a basement. Her face was bruised again, fresh marks layered over old ones. Her eyes were open. Alive. Terrified. Bait. Something cold settled into Kang's chest. Behind him, Footsteps approached. "Boss," one of his men said quietly. "Jamin is awake." Kang didn't turn. "Did he see them?" "Yes. He says there were 4. Not 3. Kang's eyes narrowed. And Diego Cruz was there. That name landed like a weight. Kang finally turned away from the wall. "Find him," he said. "Every informant. Every street. Every corner." "Police are asking questions," another man said carefully. Kang's gaze cut to him. "They'll find nothing," he said. "Make sure of it." The men nodded and moved quickly. Back at the penthouse, Zuri was still asleep. She lay curled under a blanket too big for her doll tucked under her chin. Her breathing was slow, even. She didn't know her mother had been taken again. Kang stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment longer than necessary. For the first time since this began, doubt crept in. Not about the violence. About the cost. His phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. An address. 4 words. "Come alone or she dies." Kang stared at the screen. A slow smile touched his lips, but there was no warmth in it. Diego Cruz had made a choice. And choices had consequences. Within the hour, the city changed. Phones rang in dark rooms. Doors were opened quietly. Men who hadn't heard Kang's name in years suddenly remembered favors they owed. Every camera that could be reached was reached. Every set of eyes that could be bought was bought. Fear did the rest. Zuri woke later that morning to sunlight and silence. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Mama," she called softly. No answer. Kang entered the room a moment later. "Is Mama better today?" she asked. Kang crouched down in front of her, forcing his face to soften. "She's still resting," he said. Zuri nodded, but something in her eyes shifted. "She promised she wouldn't leave again," she whispered. The words cut deeper than any blade ever had. Kang looked away for half a second, then back at her. "She didn't leave you," he said. "I promise." Zuri studied his face like she was trying to decide if promises meant the same thing to him as they did to her. "Okay," she said finally. She hugged her doll tighter. Kang stood and walked back into his office. The photograph lay on his desk now. Amara's eyes stared back at him. This was no longer about cleaning up a mess. This was personal. This was war. Diego wanted him angry. Wanted him reckless. He would get neither. He would get everything. If this chapter shook you, it's because moments like this don't happen in stories alone. They happen when people think they can hurt the innocent and walk away. Listening matters. Staying matters. And as Kang Dae-hoon stared at a message written in blood, the city had no idea it was about to learn what happens when a man who fears nothing decides he has something to protect. The city didn't wake up that morning. It held its breath. Phones rang in places they hadn't rung in years. Quiet bars opened their back doors before sunrise. Men who survived by knowing when to stay invisible suddenly felt exposed, like the ground beneath them had shifted. Kang Dae-hoon had made one decision. And that decision moved everything. From his office high above the streets, Kang stood alone, staring at the map spread across his desk. It wasn't a neat map. It was layered. Streets marked in pen. Names scribbled in the margins. Old routes, old favors, old wounds. He touched the glass wall beside him, feeling the city's hum through steel and concrete. "Activate everyone," he said. No shouting. No anger. Just certainty. The orders went out fast. Korean syndicates that controlled docks and freight routes. African street contacts who knew every corner where money and fear changed hands. Officials who wore clean suits by day and took quiet payments by night. No one asked why. They already knew. Traffic cameras blinked and fed footage into rooms that didn't exist on any blueprint. ATM feeds rewound. Store cameras turned their eyes inward. Phones were tracked. Patterns drawn. The city's memory was peeled open. In cramped rooms filled with screens, Kang's people worked without speaking. Fingers moved fast. Faces stayed blank. They weren't hunting out of loyalty. They were hunting because they were afraid of what happened if they didn't. Names surfaced. Then vanished. Safe houses were checked and found empty. Cars abandoned. Apartments cleared out hours earlier. Diego Cruz was moving. And he was moving smart. Back in the penthouse, the citywide storm went unnoticed. Zuri slept through it all. She lay curled on the couch again, one arm flung over her doll, her breathing slow and even. The sun crept across the floor, warming her face, but she didn't stir. She didn't know her mother was gone. Again. Kong stood at the doorway for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. This wasn't supposed to be her world. He had grown up learning how power worked, how fear worked, how to take and hold ground. Zuri only knew how to trust. That contrast toward him. A knock came at the door. Min-jae stepped in, phone already in his hand. Boss, we've got movement. Where? Industrial zones mostly. Old warehouses. A few abandoned buildings near the river. Kung nodded. Anything solid? Not yet. But people are talking. Why? Min-jae hesitated. Because they're scared. Kang looked back at Zuri one last time before turning away. Good, he said. Fear is honest. Hours passed. The city tightened. Street dealers disappeared midday. Mechanics suddenly remembered license plates. Security guards at forgotten buildings made calls they had never planned to make. Kang stayed in his office silent, hands braced against the desk. This was the hardest part. Not the violence. The waiting. Because rage wanted to move fast. Wanted to crush. Wanted to make examples. But restraint was sharper. And he needed sharp. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Kong didn't answer right away. He already knew. He picked it up. An address appeared on the screen. Nothing else. Then another message followed. Come alone or she dies. Kang stared at the words. For a moment, the city noise faded. The screens behind him blurred. The power he held felt distant. Come alone. Diego still thought this was a game of rules. Still thought fear could be aimed. Kang exhaled slowly. He walked back into the living room. Zuri was awake now, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing again. She looked up when he entered. Did Mama call? She asked. Kang stopped. No, he said. Her face fell for just a second before she masked it, the way children learn to do when they don't want to cry. Okay, she said softly. She went back to her drawing. Kang crouched beside her. She loves you, he said. Zuri nodded. I know. She looked up at him then. You won't let the bad man hurt her again, right? There it was. The question he couldn't dodge. Kang met her eyes. No, he said. I won't. Zuri seemed satisfied with that. She returned to her crayons, humming under her breath. Kang stood. He walked back into his office and closed the door. The address glowed on his phone. Industrial waterfront. Old structures. Forgotten by most. Perfect for someone who wanted control. He sent one message. Prepare teams. No sirens. No mistakes. Then another. Clear my path. The replies came back fast. Ready. Understood. Already moving. Kang slipped his phone into his pocket. He checked his watch. Diego had asked him to come alone. And Kang would. But alone had never meant unprotected. He paused once more at the doorway, listening to Zuri's quiet humming on the other side. This city belonged to him. But the reason he was about to tear it apart was sleeping 10 feet away, trusting him with everything she had left. If this chapter tightened your chest, it's because power means nothing when a child is the one paying the price. Stories like this don't survive without people who stay and listen. And as Kang Dae-hoon stepped toward the address sent by a desperate man, someone was about to learn the difference between making a threat and waking a force that doesn't stop. The warehouse sat at the edge of the docks like it had been forgotten on purpose. Rust ate through its walls in long streaks. Broken windows stared out at the water like empty eyes. The tide rolled in slow and steady, slapping against concrete pillars, patient in a way that felt wrong. This was the kind of place people didn't come back from. Kang Dae-hoon parked several blocks away. He stepped out of the car alone. No guards. No convoy. No visible weapons. At least, not where anyone could see. The night air was thick with salt and oil. Somewhere far off, a ship horn sounded, low and distant. Kong adjusted his jacket and walked, his footsteps calm, measured, echoing too clearly in the open space. High above, in the dark, eyes were already watching. From broken windows. From catwalks. From behind rusted machinery. The trap was set. Inside the warehouse, a single work light burned in the center of the floor, casting harsh shadows across the concrete. Under that light sat a chair. And tied to it, Amara. Her hands were bound behind her back. Rope dug into her wrists. Her face was bruised again, fresh marks layered over healing ones. Her shirt was stained with blood that hadn't fully dried. Her eyes lifted when she heard footsteps. Fear flashed across her face. Then relief. "Kong," she whispered. Behind her, a gun pressed harder against her head. "Don't talk," Diego Cruz snapped, his voice sharp and shaking. "Don't you dare talk." He stepped forward into the light. Diego looked thinner. Wild. His arm was bandaged badly, blood already seeping through the cloth. His eyes darted constantly, never resting, like he expected the walls themselves to turn on him. "You came," he said, laughing too loud. "Of course you came. Big man. Big hero." Kong stopped a few steps away. He took in the scene without reacting. The ropes. The gun. The men hiding in the shadows. "How many?" Diego sneered. "You think I don't know how this works? You think I didn't plan for you?" Kong said nothing. That silence made Diego angry. "You did this," Diego shouted. "You kicked in my door. You embarrass me in front of my people. You think you can just take what's mine and walk away." "She was never yours," Kong said calmly. Diego's laugh cracked. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to pretend you're better. You kill people. You ruin lives. You just wear nicer clothes." Kong took one step forward. Diego shoved the gun harder against Amara's head. "Stop," Diego yelled. "Another step, and I swear." "You won't," Kong said. The certainty in his voice cut through the noise. Diego blinked. "What?" "You won't shoot her," Kong continued. "If you wanted her dead, you'd already be gone. You need her alive. She's the only thing keeping you breathing." Amara squeezed her eyes shut. Diego's hand trembled. "You think you know me?" he spat. "You think I'm scared of you?" "Yes," Kong said. "You are." The words landed heavy. Diego's breathing grew fast and uneven. "I'm not afraid. I'm not." "You're bleeding," Kong said. "You're hiding in a place like this. And you brought her because you had nothing else." Silence stretched. Then Diego screamed. "You took everything from me." In the shadows, men shifted. That was the mistake. A sharp sound cut through the air. One of Diego's men dropped without a word, collapsing behind a stack of crates. Another sharp sound. A second body hit the ground. Diego spun around, panic flooding his face. "What the?" Red dots appeared on the walls. On the floor. On Diego's chest. The trap closed. From the catwalks above, Kang's people revealed themselves, weapons trained, movements smooth and controlled. Diego staggered back, dragging Amara's chair with him. "You said come alone," he screamed. "I did," Kang said, walking forward again. "I came." He stopped right in front of Amara. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This isn't your fault," Kang said softly. Diego swung the gun toward Kong. His hand shook too much. The shot went wide, hitting metal and sparking uselessly. Kong moved. Fast. He grabbed Diego's wrist and twisted. There was a sound like a dry branch snapping. Diego screamed, dropping the gun. He swung with his other hand, wild and desperate. Kong blocked it and twisted again. Another snap. Diego collapsed to his knees, sobbing, clutching his ruined hands. "Please," he cried. "Please, I didn't mean." "You did," Kong said. He nodded once. The sound that followed was short. Final. Kang was already cutting Amara's ropes when Diego's body hit the floor. She collapsed forward, and Kong caught her. "You're safe," he said. "Your daughter is safe." Amara broke down in his arms, shaking, crying into his shoulder. Above them, the warehouse went quiet. Too quiet. Kang lifted her carefully and carried her toward the exit, not looking back. Outside, the tide kept rolling in, washing against concrete like it always had. Back at the penthouse, Zuri slept. She dreamed of holding hands under a big yellow sun. She didn't know her world was about to change again. If this held you tight, it's because fear loses its power when it's finally faced. Stories like this remind us that silence helps no one. And as Kong walked out of the place where men disappear, carrying a woman who survived, the hardest part was still waiting, telling a child that sometimes the truth comes with scars that never fully fade. The warehouse did not echo with screams. That was the part people never understood. When professionals worked, sound disappeared. High above the concrete floor, shadows shifted. One by one, Diego's remaining men dropped where they stood. No warnings. No last words. Just bodies folding into stillness, swallowed by darkness and rust. No witnesses. Diego didn't realize it right away. He was too busy shaking. Too busy staring at Kang like this was still a conversation he could win. He raised the gun again with hands that barely listened to him anymore. The first shot went wild, tearing into a steel beam. Sparks flew. The sound was sharp, useless, desperate. The second shot hit nothing but air. Kong didn't flinch. He stepped forward. Diego fired again, shouting something that didn't make sense anymore. Words tripped over fear. Pride cracking under pressure. Kong closed the distance in 2 calm steps. He caught Diego's wrist mid-shot. Twisted. The sound was unmistakable. Diego screamed as the gun clattered to the floor. Kong didn't stop. He moved with control, not anger. Another twist. Another break. Diego dropped to his knees, clutching his arms to his chest, rocking back and forth like a child who had finally realized there was no escape. "I didn't mean it," Diego sobbed. "I swear I didn't mean it." His face pressed against the cold concrete. Blood smeared under his cheek. "I was angry. I lost control. She made me." "Stop," Kong said quietly. Diego froze. That single word carried more weight than all the shouting before it. Kong crouched in front of him. "You beat her," Kong said. "You scared a child into running through rain to beg strangers for help." Diego shook his head, tears streaming. "Please. Please. I'll leave. I'll disappear. I won't touch her again." Kong studied him. This was what Diego had always been. Loud when powerful. Small when stripped bare. "You already tried disappearing," Kong said. "And you came back." Diego's breath hitched. "Please." Kong stood. He turned his head slightly. That was the order. A short sound followed. Final. Diego Cruz did not scream again. He did not leave a body behind. He simply ceased to exist. Kong was already moving back toward Amara. Her knees gave out the moment she felt the ropes cut free. Her strength, held together by fear, finally ran out. She collapsed into his arms. Her body shook with silent sobs, fingers clutching the front of his jacket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "It's over," Kang said softly. "He can't hurt you anymore." She tried to speak. No words came out. Just breath and tears. He held her until she could stand again. "Zuri," she whispered suddenly, panic flaring again. "My baby? She's safe," Kong said immediately. "She's been safe the whole time." Her face crumpled. Relief hit harder than fear ever had. Outside, the night swallowed everything. The docks looked the same. The water kept moving. The city kept breathing. Nothing about the place suggested what had just ended inside those walls. Kang carried Amara out himself. No one followed too closely. No one spoke. This was finished. At the penthouse, Zuri slept through it all. She lay tangled in blankets, her doll tucked under her chin, her face peaceful in a way that felt unfair after everything she had survived. Kong stood over her for a long moment when they returned. Amara was taken to a secure room. Doctors moved quietly. Instructions were given. Zuri stirred as Kong adjusted the blanket around her. Her eyes fluttered open. "Kong," she murmured. "Yes," he said. "Did you find Mama?" He knelt beside her. "Yes." Her lips curved into the smallest smile. "Can I see her tomorrow?" Kang hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes," he said. That smile stayed with him longer than it should have. He rose and stepped out of the room, closing the door gently behind him. Down the hall, blood was being cleaned from floors that would never tell stories. Phones buzzed with confirmations. Loose ends vanished. No witnesses. No questions. Only silence. Kong stood alone at the window afterward, the city spread beneath him like a map of choices already made. He had ended a man tonight. But the part that weighed on him was not the violence. It was the promise. Because keeping a child safe was harder than destroying any enemy. If this story pulled something tight inside you, it's because justice doesn't always wear a clean face. Stories like this survive when people choose not to look away. And as Kong Dae-hoon stared out at a city that feared him, the next battle wouldn't be fought in warehouses or shadows, but in daylight, where protection has a price no amount of power can fully erase. Morning came quietly. Too quietly for what had happened. At the warehouse, there was nothing left to find. No bodies. No blood worth testing. No cameras that worked long enough to remember anything. By the time the sun rose over the docks, it looked like any other abandoned place the city had forgotten. And the city was very good at forgetting. Reports were rewritten. Timelines adjusted. Witnesses suddenly remembered being somewhere else. The police followed a trail that led neatly away from Kong Dae-hoon and straight into nothing. By afternoon, the story was already changing. A fight between low-level criminals. An internal dispute. No survivors willing to talk. Case closed. At the private clinic, Amara awoke slowly. Pain greeted her first. Then light. Then the steady sound of machines doing their quiet work. Her ribs ached. Her throat felt dry. But she was alive. That realization hit hard. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Easy, a nurse said gently. You're safe. Safe. The word felt strange in her mouth. A few hours later, the door opened again. And Zuri ran in. Mama. The sound of her daughter's voice broke something open inside Amara. She reached out with shaking arms as Zuri climbed onto the bed, careful but desperate, pressing her face into her mother's neck. I thought you went away again, Zuri whispered. Amara held her tighter than her ribs allowed, tears streaming down her face. I'm here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. From the doorway, Kong watched. He didn't step inside. He didn't interrupt. Some moments were not his to touch. Recovery took time. But it happened. Doctors visited less often. Bruises faded from deep purple to yellow. Amara learned how to breathe again without flinching. And always, there was protection. Quiet men in clean clothes. Cars that never stayed too long. No names exchanged. No explanations given. Paperwork moved just as quietly. Legal documents appeared that told a simple, believable story. Kong Dae-hoon had been a family friend for years. A protector. Someone who stepped in when things went wrong. No systems were involved. No questions raised. It was clean. Too clean for anyone to argue with. When Amara was strong enough to walk without help, Kong came to see her. Not in the clinic room. In a small waiting area filled with sunlight. You're leaving the city, he said. She nodded slowly. I understand. A new place, he continued. Quiet. Safe. New names. Zuri sat beside her mother, swinging her legs, listening without really understanding. Will we see you again? Zuri asked suddenly. Kong paused. Yes, he said. If you need me. That seemed to satisfy her. The move happened quickly. No goodbyes. No announcements. A modest house far from the city replaced the penthouse. A small garden. Neighbors who waved but didn't ask questions. A school within walking distance. Zuri laughed more there. Amara slept better. And Kong stayed away. Not because he didn't care. Because distance was part of the protection. No debt was mentioned. None needed to be. They all felt it. Back in the city, life returned to its rhythm. Kong resumed meetings. Made decisions. Ended problems before they grew. But something had changed. Late one night, alone in his office, Kong opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. A child's drawing. Two stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. He stared at it longer than he ever stared at maps or contracts. Power had always been his shield. Now it felt like a burden. Because keeping them safe didn't end with moving them away. It meant watching forever. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button and tell us what time is it from where you are watching. Stories like this matter because protection doesn't always come with applause, only responsibility. And as Kang Dae-hoon closed the drawer and turned back to the city, the final truth was settling in. Saving them was easy compared to living with what he had become to do it. Years did not announce themselves when they arrived. They slipped in quietly. The small house at the edge of town filled with ordinary sounds, school mornings, running water, music drifting from a radio left on too long. The garden grew wild in summer and rested in winter. Neighbors waved. Children rode bikes past the gate. And Zuri grew. She grew taller than her mother expected. She grew louder. She grew curious. The fear that once lived behind her eyes slowly loosened its grip and moved somewhere far back, where it no longer ruled her days. She loved colors. Not the neat ones. Not the safe ones. She painted bold skies. Dark blues and burning oranges. People with hands too large and suns too bright. Teachers said she had a gift. Amara just smiled and nodded, knowing gifts often came from places no one saw. Amara rebuilt her life quietly. She worked. She studied at night. She learned how to breathe deeply again without flinching at sudden sounds. The bruises faded. The memories did not, but they no longer owned her. There was no mention of the past in their new life. No questions. No explanations. Just distance. And safety. In another city, in a tower of glass and steel, Kang Dae-hoon watched time pass from above. He expanded his reach. Negotiated harder deals. Closed doors before problems ever reached them. The world still feared him. That did not change. But his questions did. They were always the same. Are they safe? Are they happy? The answers came back quietly. Yes. Yes. That was enough. He never visited. Never sent gifts. Never stepped into their sunlight. Protection worked best when it stayed unseen. Years later, Zuri wrote letters anyway. They were short at first. Messy handwriting. Drawings folded into the pages. Hi, Uncle Kong, one read. I got an A in art. I planted tomatoes with Mama. They always reached him. He never replied. But he read every word. One evening, alone in his office long after the city lights came on, Kong opened a drawer he kept locked. Inside, beneath contracts and sealed envelopes, lay a single sheet of paper. Old now. Creased. Faded at the edges. A child's drawing. Two stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. Thank you. He took it out carefully, as if the paper might break if handled wrong. He traced the lines with one finger. This was the thing no one knew about him. Not his men. Not his enemies. Not the politicians who smiled too easily when he entered a room. This drawing had done what power never could. It had bound him. He had ended lives without hesitation. Destroyed men who deserved worse. Built an empire that ran on fear and precision. None of that redeemed him. He did not pretend it did. But this promise to a child, this had given his violence a direction. Protection, not conquest. Outside the window, the city glowed the way it always had. Busy. Loud. Hungry. Kong folded the paper and placed it back in the drawer. He closed it gently. Somewhere far away, Zuri stood in front of a canvas in her room, paint on her fingers, sunlight spilling across the floor. She stepped back, studying her work. It was a tall figure standing behind a small girl. Not holding her hand. Just standing close. Watching. Amara appeared in the doorway and smiled. Dinner's ready, she said. Zuri nodded and set her brush down. Neither of them knew why that figure always appeared in her art. They only knew life felt safe. And that was enough. Back in the tower, Kang Dae-hoon stood alone, his reflection faint in the glass. He was not forgiven. He was not free. But somewhere in the world, a little black girl slept without fear. And that was the weight he chose to carry. If this story stayed with you, it's because some protectors never step into the light. They stay where no one claps for them, where the cost is quiet and lifelong. Stories like this survive because someone listens, because someone cares enough to stay. And if you believe the smallest voices deserve the strongest shields, then keep these stories alive. Subscribe, not for drama, but for the truth that protection often comes from places no one expects. Because somewhere tonight, another child may be deciding whether to run into the rain, hoping someone powerful enough and human enough is listening.